Well, I have told my mother more than once to quit slipping $1 or $2 to an elder just to get them to tell that you're my wife or my sister. Don't do that. No, that's been done before as far as go somewhere and I bring my mother, but I always take that to mean she looks so young. It couldn't be the other way, that her son looks so old, even with the gray hair and all. But I'm glad she can be with me tonight. My wife is in Memphis visiting with her family this week, and she could not be here. My 3 children are at Riverbend tonight in Dalton at their regular place of Bible study on Wednesday evening. But I did talk to my wife this afternoon, and she said, I know you'll do well tonight. She said, wished I could be with you. What is your topic? I had not shared that with her until this afternoon. I said, what a husband owes his wife. She said, I don't know if I can get there in time or not, but anyway, I would pray that she could approve of what's going to be said here tonight. We've been married, Celicia and I, almost 24 years. Next month will be our 24th anniversary, so we're just a year away from the silver anniversary. And I am always thankful when I can talk about the beauty of God's divine arrangement called marriage. And with my mother here tonight, I must express my appreciation to her because when my brother and I were coming of age, she always taught us to make sure that when we got married that we understand that our married partner, our wives, would be the most important earthly relationship. And never to forget that. And so I learned that from my mother early in life. And I've tried to be faithful, remembering that indeed my wife is the most precious person on earth to me. I think it's good for all of us to remember that the husband-wife relationship is so very, very special because God, in the beginning of time, after creating the heavens and the earth, and after creating the animal kingdom and all the vegetation, he then creates man. And in Genesis 2, as you study the detailed account of the creation of man, you come to a verse that just stands out. A text that all of a sudden gives you a jolt, because up to verse 16 of chapter 2, everything you've read that God has created is good. And then Genesis 1:31, it's very good. But then all of a sudden you find out something's not good. And what's not good? What's not good is that man should be alone. But of course God already knew what he was going to do to satisfy a desire that he put in the heart of man. It's interesting when you read in Genesis 2 that detailed account about the creation of man. And by the way, I believe everything was created per Genesis 1, but Genesis 2, just as inspired, is like supplemental material to tell us about the crowning achievement of God's creation. And so we go into some detail in chapter 2 as we study the creation of man. But after God said it's not good for man to be alone, there's an interesting few passages right after that seems totally unrelated to man's being alone. It says that God brought the animals to Adam to be named. And I've often wondered in the past, why is that there? It seems inserted in the wrong place. Here it is that God says, it's not good for man to be alone. Now, Adam, I want you to go and name the animals. But I believe it's there for a purpose. I'm sure that it is. Because something must have happened in the mind and in the heart of Adam as he's naming the animals. Because for every male, there was a female. Don't you think he had to start wondering about that? Here's Mr. Skunk, but he's got Miss Skunk. Here's Mr. Giraffe, he's got Miss Giraffe. Mr. Hippopotamus, there's Miss Hippopotamus. Somewhere along the way, Adam has to start asking, wait a minute, where's mine? These animals, that's not companion material. And so God knew what Adam needed, and I believe placed a natural desire in the heart and mind of man for someone to be similar to him, but different in all the right ways. So you know what the text says. God formed from the side of man a woman. And when Adam awakened from a sleep, an induced sleep that God provided for him, showing that God was the first anesthetist and also the first surgeon. He provided the sleep, and God also performed the surgery, closed up the flesh, and then God brings the woman to Adam. That's very interesting to me because it shows that God is in the business of bringing those things that are special to you and me. He brought the woman to Adam. Was Adam pleased? Oh yes. This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. I've heard it said before that no English translation of the Bible can fully express what overcame Adam at that particular time. Somebody said probably the best English word you could put there is this: wow. Right? I mean, this is it. This is exactly what I need. This is exactly what fulfills my desires. Adam was pleased with Eve. And at that moment, a desire for the woman that is natural, that is God-given, was placed within the heart of man. It's still that way today. It's only when perversion abounds that we misunderstand what God intended all along. God brought the woman to the man. And I teach young people today, if you desire to have a husband or a wife, whatever the case may be, make sure you're praying about that early in life. I believe God will answer those prayers in accordance with His divine will, because God wants what's best for you. He wants you to be content. He wants you to be happy. He wants you to have joy. And really, a God-ordained home is a taste of heaven. It really is. And so tonight, we're going to focus our attention primarily on what the husband, the head of the home, owes his wife. Now, may I say this? As we think about the role and the responsibility of the husband in the home, we would note that the husband is the head of the home in this sense. He is the one who directs the affairs of the home, because everything that God does, He does in an orderly way. It's not that the woman in any way is superior, or rather inferior to the man. She is one who is equal, but because of her love for the Lord and her respect for her husband, she will be submissive to him for order's sake. That's what we do if we respect God, correct? All of us, to some extent or another, have to be submissive to authorities that be. And God says in the home, I want the husband to be the head. He was first formed, then Eve was formed, and because of the basis of the transgression in the garden. So it is that God has established order in the home, and the wife in no way is inferior to him. In fact, my wife has told me before, she says, you know, I am superior to you in one way. And I asked, what is that way? And she says, I'm superior to you at being a woman. And she's absolutely right. She has a role to play, and I have a role to play. Someone has said that the husband is the head of the home, the wife the heart of the home. And can't help but agree with that. Now, you've heard it said before that marriages are made in heaven. But somebody responded by saying, so are thunder and lightning made in heaven as well. But we know this, God does want to be involved in our homes. After all, He created the home. He designed the family arrangement as it is. And when any society perverts that arrangement, which is foundational to a society's existence, then only harm can come. In Genesis chapter 2, where God brought the woman to the man and they established the first home, and to that union was born children, you'll remember that they had two boys particularly that stand out, Cain and Abel. And we know what Cain did to Abel. And one of Cain's descendants, according to Genesis 4:19, was named Lamech. And of Lamech it says that he wasn't satisfied with one wife, he wanted two wives. Now that wasn't in God's original plan, was it? It was one man for one woman for life. But then by the time you get to Genesis chapter 6, right before the great deluge and the building of Noah's Ark, you'll find that Genesis 6:1, every man had his thoughts on evil continually and took as many wives as he chose, and those wives he chose were all based on his fleshly appetites, his lust, his desires that were sinful in nature. And wherever you have that kind of promiscuous behavior, you know what goes along with it? It's right there in the text in Genesis 6. Violence and corruption. That's what you'll have. So I am grateful that the elders of this congregation have chosen this particular theme for this summer's series, because we need a whole lot of teaching right now across America on what establishes a God-ordained home. There's a lot of money spent and a lot of energy devoted to a wedding these days, but not nearly as much attention as ought to be given to the marriage relationship. Here at the outset, I want to give you something that may sound simple, but I've heard it preached and taught in workshops and seminars of which I've been a part many, many times. If you want your marriage to succeed, it's going to take this. It's just one word, all right? Listen carefully. It's 4 letters. You ready for it? It's going to take W-O-R-K, work. There have been people say before to my wife and me, say, you both were just made for one another. I mean, you just both seem to get along, and you can just tell that you both complement the other. I appreciate that. But my wife and I have worked to build what we think is a good quality marriage. It did not just happen. And we're still working on that. We're still not where we want to be, but yet we believe our marriage relationship is so important, and the vows we made are such that we must continue to work on that relationship and make it everything God intended for it to be. If something is of value, what do? You work to make it successful. And so tonight we're going to be looking particularly at the husband, and we'll get there in just a moment. But I want to mention this word for just a moment, a word that has become quite common in our society today. Do you ever hear this phrase used, the dysfunctional family? A lot of people talking about the dysfunctional family today. And when you hear of a dysfunctional family, you know that means the family is somehow impaired. Something is not right in that family. Something is missing. Sometimes there are innocent individuals that are part of a dysfunctional family. And we do everything we can to encourage innocent people that are in dysfunctional families. Those who are guilty of making their family dysfunctional, we try to encourage in the right way. But sometimes we don't succeed as we try to encourage. And it is heartbreaking. But did you know that family comes from a Latin word that means household servants? Family comes from a Latin word that has to do with household servants. So think about that just for a moment. What does God intend for a family unit to be like? A family unit that's filled with serving attitudes, where there are interrelationships in that family, each one looking out for what's best for each member of the family, each one willing to serve. Just think how that would radically change marriage and family in America tonight if everybody in the family started talking about, or just thinking about and meditating upon, being a servant in the family. What can I do to help my family? Now, when there is a breakdown of that service, what do you have? It's no longer functioning properly, so it becomes dysfunctional. Now, the family unit will not function properly until we restore the sacredness of marriage. Hebrews 13:4, marriage is honorable in all, the marriage bed undefiled. Psalm 127:1, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. And yet in our country tonight, there are a lot of people who cannot even define what a marriage is. We don't even know the biblical concept of marriage. We have many tonight who are telling us that there are no longer just two genders, there are multiple genders. Don't you find it interesting during this coronavirus pandemic that we are told by some we just need to follow the science? Follow the science. Have you noticed that the ones who generally are saying that are the very ones who do not know when a life begins? They don't know that they're just two genders. They don't know when a marriage is good and right in the sight of God, and yet they say, just follow the science, and yet they're not scientific at all. So it is, we're interested in restoring the home as God would have it. And marriage has a divine purpose, and our youth must understand that purpose. What is the purpose of a marriage relationship? For far too long, during another age, there were those who just thought the marriage relationship was for populating the earth. It was for the addition of children into our. That's part of it, but that's not number one. Not the number one reason. God says the number one reason is for abiding companionship. There is no command in Scripture that says this couple who come together in marriage have to have children. And we need to quit saying to a young couple when they get married, when you're going to start your family, because they've already started a family. Now, the children are a blessing to a family. Grandchildren are a special blessing to a family. That's wonderful. God ordained such. But a marriage begins when a man legally marries a woman, legal in the sight of God, by the way. And so it is that we need to remember that when the husband and wife come together, they are entering into a special relationship where they're now identified as a new family. And our young people need to see through the lives of Christian married couples how they too can establish such as well. So for marriage to function properly, we must understand that its primary purpose is for abiding companionship. You think about the importance of trust in a relationship. There is nothing that will destroy a marriage relationship more than lack of trust. It can be that our minds can overreact, and we can imagine things that are not really happening. We can be very, very suspicious, even with one another. That shouldn't be. But one thing for sure we need in the marriage relationship is to build trust. Nothing can destroy the trust in a marriage relationship more than sexual sin. I think about Joseph. What a man he was. The Bible makes it clear that Joseph was a rather handsome young man, and he was a godly young man. And there's Joseph in Potiphar's household doing what's right, honoring his master, living in accordance with God's principles. But day after day he's seduced, isn't he? By Potiphar's own wife. Day after day he resists. Well, just do what's right. Everything will be okay. Well, ultimately everything will be okay. But sometimes people will lie about you, right? Joseph did what was right. And then his Potiphar's wife said, here's what Joseph's been doing. She'd been seducing him, trying to get him to engage in immorality. He continued to refuse. And he even said, you belong to somebody else. You're not my wife. And how can I do this great wickedness in the sight of God? Ultimately, all sin is an offense toward God. I want to tell you this. A young lady ought to be looking for a Joseph. I've said to my daughters before, don't you ever be taken in by some young man who wants to destroy your purity. I don't care how enticing and flattering are his words, how often he says, but I love you. If he loves you, he'll guard your purity. Amen. Don't give in to that. If that happens while you're out, you've got my number. And I'll come to where you are. And I'll pick you up. And I'll take care of him. But don't give in to that. Don't give in to it. Look for a Joseph. But then consider another character that we love and respect. And we feel for him because we too are human beings, especially those of us who are men. We can feel for King David, can't we? Because we know the power of lust and what happens because we allow our eyes to stray. And there is David on the rooftop. Somebody said if you don't want to get in trouble, you need to be on the battlefield or in the harvest field. And David was neither place, was he? And David liked what he saw when he viewed Bathsheba. And David liked what he saw because he was a man, flesh and blood. But despite being characterized at one time in his life as a man after God's own heart, he sinned grievously. When he not only brought Bathsheba to his bedchamber, but then had her husband killed, and ultimately in his repentance, even though he had sinned against Bathsheba and against his family and against his country, he had ultimately sinned against Uriah. He said, against thee, God, and thee only have I sinned. Sin is ultimately against God. And so we see the breakdown of trust that exists in so many families. In all my years of preaching, some 30 years or more of such, couples have sat in my office before, so angry with one another, ready to divorce because of a breaking down of trust. So you and I have to understand that if we're going to have a great marriage, we've got to learn something about communication. This is where it gets tough for us men, all right? Communication. You see, a lot of men and women who get married will later divorce because they can't understand that men and women don't think the same way. And we don't communicate the same way. And as a result of that, that causes problems. Now, we've made these vows until death us do part, and those vows that were made are not just made to one another, and they're not just made before an audience of people. They go up before the God of heaven. So we've got to take this seriously, don't we? But here comes that communication problem. I heard about a couple who now had the empty nest. Some of you have experienced the empty nest syndrome. The kids are all gone. They've left home. And some couples have told me, they said, when that happens, that you just kind of have to start over sometime. You've been spending so much time with your children, and that's why lessons like this are important. You've been spending so much time with your children, you feel like, we don't know each other. We've got to get to know one another again. Now, I'll tell you this, I've got a 21-year-old son and a 19-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old daughter, and they're all still at home. But hopefully for too long, they're going to go. I mean, it's just getting time, Oh, I love them. They're good kids. They cause me no problem. But I think they'll do that. They got their priorities in order, and that's fine. But there comes that time when they have to leave. And they're expected to leave and start their own families. Now, here's this couple who decide to put a little spice back in our marriage. Why don't we go to one of these marriage seminars? Now, who do you think was behind that? Was it him or her? Oh, it was her. He didn't think they needed that. That's how men are. I wonder what you're talking about. Why we need to go to something like this? We've been married all these many years. I told you when I got married that I loved you. I told you if I changed my mind, you'd be the first to know. So why do we need to go to some marriage seminar? I just think she said it'd be good for us to go to that marriage seminar. And so they go to the marriage seminar, and it is just wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful. They're enjoying themselves immensely. The marriage seminar speaker, he says, I tell you what, husbands, every one of you in this room ought to be able to identify what your wife's favorite flower is. And that man, he kind of pushed his wife a little bit. He said, well, I've got this one. He said, I know what your favorite flower is. He says, Pillsbury All-Purpose. No, that's not what was intended. The seminar's over, and he's just so pleased with himself because he went to that seminar, but she's excited. I mean, we're starting over again. And they're driving home. She says, let's don't go home yet. She says, not far from where we live, there's this little coffee house. And she said, we can go in there and get some coffee. And she says, we'll get some dessert. And we'll just sit back and we'll talk. And he said, no, I'm tired after all this. I just want to go home and go to bed, right? He missed it, didn't he? He didn't get it. It wasn't communicated to him what he really needed to do. And that's what we need to discuss. Those of us who are men, we have a problem listening. We might as well admit it. Now, this is the night, and by the way, I preach these things in a lot of different places, and sometimes I'll do an entire seminar and I'll address the wives one night, address the husbands one night, but tonight I've been asked to address the husbands. That's just how it is. So tonight is the night when the women can go like that, and husbands, your ribs will be a little bit sore before we get through tonight, but this is primarily for our ladies tonight, okay? And so what I want to say is something that I want to be very, very helpful to us. As we set forth in this effort over the next few minutes, I want you to think about those 4 Greek words that are used to express love. Isn't that good how the Greek language works? Because that word love is so abused in our English language. I mean, you may leave here tonight hungry and you say, I'd just love to go get some pizza. Or you may say, I just love that new car I've got. And we talk about how we love family and friends, same word. And then we come in here also and we sing about our love for God, same word. See how it can often be abused? But the Greeks have 4 words. Eros, love. That's physical in nature. It says, I'm physically attracted to you. That's very, very healthy, by the way. Somewhere in those teenage years, young man, young lady, all of a sudden feelings change from where they used to couldn't stand one another. Now they start finding an interest there, and that's healthy. And what we want to do is to be able to help those young folks be able to nourish that, where they can ultimately reach that state of marriage and enjoy all the beauty and all the joy that comes through that sacred relationship called marriage. We're not trying to I've told many young people this before, Christians and preachers and elders, mamas and daddies who love you, we're not trying, for example, to hold the physical attraction that you enjoy. We're not trying to hold that back. We understand those we're just trying to say, wait until you can enjoy that in all of its divine beauty. That's what we say when we talk to you about trying to be pure until the time you marry. But eros, I am attracted to you. In other words, storge. Storge love says my family is important to me. Phileo love, not only do I love you, but I like you. You know, my wife, mentioned her earlier, I love her. You'd be surprised if I said otherwise. She's easy to love, but you know, even if she's not easy to love, I've got to love her. Even if I'm not easy to love, she's got to love me. Why, we made vows to one another before God. We are commanded to love, so see, love's not just an emotion. We're commanded to love, but you know, not only do I love my wife, I happen to like her. I like her so much, I like to go places with just her. If I pick somebody to go on a trip with me and I only pick one person, well, who am I going to? I'm choosing my wife. Oh, yes, that's the role she fills in my life. She's my companion. She's the helpmeet. She's the one that God said, hey, Barry, it's not good for you to be alone. Here's somebody for, and boy, he picked out a good one for me. That's phileo love. And then there's agape love. Here's what agape love says. This is why it's the highest form. Agape love says, I will be good to you always, regardless of the circumstances. When I made those vows to you, I made vows saying that I'm going to love you and care for you and seek your best, regardless of what happens. Now, agape love is not something that just happens. You have to make it happen. It begins with a resolve of heart and a determination in your mind that this is how I'm going to be toward my mate. And that begins with proper communication. Our words, our actions, they communicate something about us. And therefore we have to take time to talk. And quite frankly, what that means is the television has to be turned off sometimes. Phones have to be put aside. Children have to be told to go to bed. There was a time when our children were younger, I remember my wife and I would decide we'd had enough of them. And so it's time for them to go to bed. We'd say, won't y'all go to bed? Time to go to bed, okay. And then we'll forget one night we did that because we were going to sit back and watch a movie on television. Just she and I, alone on the sofa, and my little girl came around the corner after we told them to go to bed and saw us sit down watching TV, and she says, aren't y'all going to bed? I said, no, we're not going to bed. Life goes on even when you go to bed. So we don't have to go to bed just because you're going to bed. Oh, okay. You see, you got to have that time just to talk. The family psychologist, James Dobson, says, communication requires time. Living in the same house and attending church together cannot substitute time for talking. And so this is directly to the men. For this purpose, we are the ones seemingly who have the hardest time doing that, because our attention so often is elsewhere. The trouble we oftentimes have in the home communicating is because, remember, God did make us different. And He made us different to make us one. The differences are to be celebrated. They're not something bad. But here's the thing. Men oftentimes are facts oriented. A woman, on the other hand, may be feelings oriented. Has nothing to do with who's smarter, more intelligent, or anything like that. It's like this. A wife, and I had to learn this, by the way. A wife may come to her husband and she pours out her heart to him, how she's hurting and how things aren't going right and how she's had a tough time. And his immediate response, he loves her, his immediate response is, how do I fix this? When she may not be asking him to fix it at all. It may not be within his power to fix it. That's not why she's coming to him. Your children may come to you, dads, saying, fix this for me, but that's not necessarily why the wife's coming to you. You know what she wants more than that? You just to hug her, embrace her, tell her you love her, and you understand. That's what she wants. Oh, to know he loves her. James Watkins used to put it like this. He said that you can take a woman and put her in a palatial mansion. She can have everything material-wise you could offer. But if she knows her husband doesn't love her, she's miserable. On the other hand, she will sweep a dirt floor in a shack if she knows deep down in her heart, this man loves me and cares for me. Facts versus feelings. Why so many times husbands misunderstand because they're not listening. Here's the reason why we often fail in our listening. Now, I didn't say you didn't hear something, but we're not listening. Husbands, as a fellow husband, she speaks in code, all right? Our wives speak another language. We don't necessarily listen to what was said, but rather we listen to what is meant. You know what I'm talking about. You've not been paying attention, and then all of a sudden you can see by the attitude expressed, it's time you paid attention. And then all of a sudden, sometimes this happens, depending on the personality, she can get very, very quiet. And then you say it. Is something wrong? What is it? Nothing. But you know it's something, right? It's something. Ladies, be mindful of us, because when we say, is there something, we really are speaking from the heart. We really want to help. But what she has perceived in us is an unwillingness to communicate, an unwillingness to listen. You see, she can't figure out why it is when she wants to talk that her husband would rather be looking at a sports network or something like that than listen to her. Now, he takes that as if she's being disrespectful. You know, he's trying to do his own thing and she ought to respect that, but she takes that to mean he doesn't care a lot about me. He's unloving. And so it turns out that what a woman needs, so we're told, more than anything else, is to know that she's loved, while it is true that a husband, more than anything else, needs to know he is respected. I believe that women must write for Hallmark, no men. Because think about it just for a moment. Whenever you go and you look at all those sappy cards that are sold in various stores for special days, whether it's a card for a man or for a woman, it's always about love. Always about love. When in fact, while a man wants to be loved, that may not be number one on his agenda. You see, he has an ego, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That's what makes him operate and drives him. He wants to know you admire him and respect him. Same way she wants to know that she is loved. And so it is that these Hallmark cards, I believe many times are written by women. I've often found it interesting that when I do go get a card for my wife, after I look at the card and I pay attention to it, I want a good card, I sign my name to it. I can't do better than Hallmark, right? I mean, I didn't go to the store and get a Dayspring or American Grease. I got Hallmark. Care enough to send the best. And nobody can write like Hallmark, so I just sign my name to it. My wife, though, will get these trifolds, where it has a story on the front, on the inside. Open it over here, it's got, I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. And then she writes her own story. Finally, I figured it out. I look at that and I'm like, I know she loves me. She didn't have to go to all that trouble. She could have just signed her name to a little, it just says, happy anniversary, love Celicia. Maybe, just maybe this is what she's wanting from me, you see. I've got to start trying to think like she thinks. Now, that's hard. You've got to watch a man who says he understands everything about a woman. He'll lie about other things too. Yeah. We don't always know, but that's what we have to do. Think about this. God made us different to make us one, and part of the fun along the way is discovering those differences. Now, my wife, when it comes to directions, she's like this. She says, now, it's completely different from me, because if I'm going somewhere, of course things have changed a lot, and if I'm going somewhere, I just type in the address there. But I always want people, even back before the Google Maps and all that came out, I said, just give me the street where it's to be found, and give me that'll get me to the place I want to go. I'm not interested in locations. I'm interested in street names. Now, my wife, on the other hand, said, well, you go down here to McDonald's, and then you turn right at Walmart, and then you'll go down here to past this park. You see, even in directions, we think a little bit differently. Think about this for just a moment. Brother Kevin mentioned his sons earlier. I love Jake and Tate, and they're not only former students of mine, they're good friends. And I've spent numerous occasions sitting with both of them in a restaurant, enjoying a meal. What would we discuss? We discuss the Bible. We discuss sports. We discuss politics. Just a whole bunch of things we might discuss that are manly things to discuss, right? I'll tell you something. You won't find us three fellas sitting down at Starbucks over a cup of coffee, holding each other's hand and saying, how you feeling? Right? Oh, no, don't do that, right? Women do that. You see, women do that. We communicate differently. And so the point is, we have to learn each other so that we can somehow communicate differently. Somebody put it like this, how our language is different. A woman a woman supposedly came into her husband and she said, I flooded the car. And he says, where's the car now? She said, it's out in the pool. Where do you think it is? I flooded the car, right? It's a different in communication. Now, I want to give you a couple of scriptures here as our time is winding down. I want to give you a couple of scriptures. And I want you to remember these. And then very, very quickly, I'm going to give us men something to think about with regard to communication, and then I'll be finished. I want you to think about some of these passages. Proverbs 15:28 says, the righteous studies to answer. Now that's true in any situation, but think about how true it is at home. That is, righteous people, Christian people, godly people, think about what they're going to say. All right? James 1:19, be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Just think how that will help our homes. Colossians 4:6, be sure that your speech is with grace, seasoned with salt. All right. Now, very quickly, I want to give us 5 ways that we men can do a better job communicating. Here's my first word. All this by alliteration. I want us to remember the word concern. Concern says, I care about you. Even so, husbands ought to love their wives even as their own bodies, Ephesians 5:28. She's part of me now. And if I'm concerned about myself, then naturally I've got to be concerned about her. My wife's interest must become my interest, just as my interest have become her interest. It is right that we place her welfare, that I place her welfare, that you place your wife's welfare above your own. Because of the role that you and I have in our homes, we are to be the protector of our families. And that includes the wife, the mother of our children. In fact, there is a sense in which we are identified as the savior of the wife. Now understand how that's used in the Bible. Not that we're like Jesus. All of us need a savior to save us from our sins. But husbands have the spiritual responsibility of getting their families to heaven. And in that sense, we become like the saviors of our families. Here's the second word. Not just concern, but comfort. Comfort says that I want to help you. Here's that passage over there in 1 Peter. You know, in 1 Peter chapter 3, the inspired writer is talking a whole lot to the wives, about 6 verses, and then all of a sudden, just one verse is addressed to the men. But oh, what's said in that one verse? Listen. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them, with your wives, according to knowledge. That's what husbands are told. Learn about your wife. Learn her. Study her, that you might treat her the way you should treat her, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, physically speaking, and as being heirs together of the grace of life. We're on the path to heaven. We're enjoying life on this path to heaven, that your prayers be not hindered. If I don't do what Peter demands here by the authority of God, then my prayers may not make it above the ceiling. The relationship I have with my God very well depends upon the relationship that I have with my wife. And so I am to comfort her. Here's a third point. Compliment her. Husbands, don't be afraid to compliment. You see, 1 Corinthians 13:4 says that love is kind. Paul would go on to write in Romans 12:10, be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love. I wonder why we're so afraid to give a compliment. Let's give compliments. I mean, you can't overdo it. If she prepares a good meal, tell her she prepared a good meal. And I'll tell you, wife will appreciate it. They say kindness is love in the little things. Sometimes I've done something at home, I didn't think about it being that big a deal, but my wife will recognize it. And she'll say, I really appreciate what you did. That made my day brighter. That helped me. I said, it wasn't that big a deal. She says, little things mean a lot. Kindness is love in the little things. Then there is, number 4, consideration. Consideration says, I respect you. I understand we may be different. I understand we don't always think the same. I understand we don't always communicate effectively, but I appreciate how God made you. You see, if a husband and wife enter the relationship saying, well, here's what I don't like about him, here's what I don't like about her, let's try to change him or her, you're going to get in trouble. No, look in the mirror. That's what we need to do. And say, how can I change myself? How can I be more godly? And when we do that, what we will find happening is we'll get out of our comfort zone. You see, it may not come natural to you to write that long letter in that Hallmark card. But start doing those things that you've not been in the habit of doing. Just see how your wife will begin to appreciate that. I sometimes have mentioned what I call the popcorn principle. And People have asked me, what are you talking about with the popcorn principle? I remember sitting on the sofa one night with my wife. We were watching a movie, or about to start watching a movie, and I thought, I really would like to have some popcorn. I wonder why she won't go in there and pop us some popcorn and fix a glass of Coca-Cola. Looks like she'd know that'd be good to go along with this movie. And she's just sitting here. That's what I'm thinking. Until all of a sudden it dawned on me, you know what? I could get up and go in there and fix some popcorn and fix some Coca-Colas. And I said, I think I'll go get some popcorn for us. How about, she said, that'd be just wonderful. Won't you go do that, right? You see, what I expected out of her, I could just as easily do. There's a man named Harley wrote a book about these things. He talks about your love bank. He tells the men specifically, he says, do things like I just said. The popcorn principle? Always be putting into your love bank. He said, because along the way you're going to have to make a withdrawal. You know it, right? And if you've got your love bank full, you can make a withdrawal every once in a while if you need to do so. And forgiveness is so very important. Learn to be a forgiver. Both husband and wives need to learn forgiveness. Sometimes we fail. Sometimes we say those things we shouldn't say. Sometimes we mistreat one another. Even though deep down we love each other, we still hurt the ones closest to us if we're not careful, don't we? And the only way to get beyond that is forgiveness. I close with this idea. Don't forget, husbands, to keep on courting your wife. That's what Brother Mac used to tell us. Some of us would be sitting there, and Brother Skip, and we'd hear Brother McNutt say, when you courting somebody, and we're like, what's courting? And we learned courting was an old-time term. We were used to that term dating. I don't know what they call it nowadays, but Brother J.A. McNutt, remember those days where you courting one another. And when you went courting one another, you usually went to a gospel meeting, the old-timers stuff. That's where you'd go. We went to a gospel meeting on our first courtship. But learn that word courting. That's a good word, an old-fashioned word. And what I'm saying is this: court, when you still court or date your wife, that continues to tell her, I want you. And I enjoy your company. And for younger husbands and wives, I say this: you got these special people, hopefully you have them, these special people called grandparents, and they'll help you out. And if you can't find grandparents to help you out with the children for a little while, find some other old folks who'd love nothing more than to have your children just for a little while. They'll give them back, but just for a little while. Just for a little while. And don't forget your own relationship. You see, before the marriage, what's going on? You're wooing one another. I've had couples come in and talk to me before, and particularly young men who said, Brother Grider, I found her. This is the one. I'm ready to get married. How long have you known this girl? About 2 or 3 weeks. No, you're not ready to get married yet after 2 or 3 weeks. All she knows is what's good about you. You've been putting on a good front. She doesn't know you yet. I said, have you had an argument yet? Not yet. I said, not ready to get married then. You've got to test this thing for a while. But we were in the business of wooing one another, you see, when we were in the courtship and in the dating phase, and we wanted to please each other. And so here's the point. Men, this is simple, but it'll work. Don't rely on how much she says. Do something practical on special days. She speaks in code. Don't forget the chocolate. Don't forget the flowers. Keep the romance alive. Hold her hand. Surprise her every once in a while. And open the car door for her. One man, he come in every day, and he'd eat his meal without ever complimenting his wife. He'd go sit in his easy chair, watch TV, wouldn't talk to her. He'd finally go to sleep there in his easy chair, go through the same routine the next day. But one day he decided he was going to do something a little different. One day he said, I like to go and work out there after I get off from work, but tomorrow's going to be different. After I go through my workout, he said, I'm not going to go home all sweaty and smelly. He says, I'm going to shower and put on some good smelling cologne. I'm going to surprise my wife. And sure enough, here's what he did. He said, I got through with my workout, and he said, I went by the store and I got some flowers. And he said, I decided I'd get some chocolate candy and take it home and surprise my wife. Well, here's what he did. When he got home, instead of pulling in the garage, he pulled up out front because he really wanted to surprise her. He went up to the door and he rang the doorbell. Oh, he's smelling good. He's looking good. Flowers in one hand, chocolates in another. And he just knew she's just going to love him for what he'd done. Anyway, she opens that door and she sees him standing there and she says, I don't believe what kind of day I've had. She says, Johnny fell off the monkey bars at school and had to take him to the doctor. The washing machine went out and now you come home drunk. You see, if we did something like that, our wives might be shocked and surprised and not ready for it. Don't give up on courting one another. And men, we can take the responsibility. My time is gone, but I want to share something with you if I can find it right here. A number of years ago, I found this and I loved it, and I decided that I wanted to start using this when I talk about marriage and family. And I learned that this couple who wrote this were members of the church. I didn't know that for a while. But Good Housekeeping magazine decided that they wanted to have a contest for married couples who've been married the longest and what was the key to their great relationship. And the couple who won were members of the church. In fact, when I read this at a congregation over in Murfreesboro several years ago, I had a young man come to me and he said, that couple that wrote that, he said, those are my grandparents. And so I've never met this couple, but I've met the grandson. But here's what they wrote. And I want you to think about this. What's the key to a successful and great marriage? We gave when we wanted to receive. We served when we wanted to feast. We shared when we wanted to keep. We listened when we wanted to talk. We submitted when we wanted to reign. We forgave when we wanted to remember. We stayed when we wanted to leave. That's the key to our marriage relationship. I wish you could have met a sweet Christian lady by the name of Hazel McDowell. Hazel McDowell was a member of the Southwest Church in Austin, Texas, where I preached for several years. Sweet Christian lady. I never knew her husband. When I arrived at Southwest, he had already departed this life. On this particular Sunday, in my sermon, I quoted from Matthew 22:30, how that in heaven there's neither marrying nor giving in marriage, but we're as the angels of heaven. I quoted that passage. You've heard it quoted many times. I'll never forget when Sister Hazel McDowell came out that Sunday. She took my hand. She said, Brother Grider, you had a fine lesson this morning. She said, but you know, every time I hear that passage you quoted this morning about there's no marrying or giving in marriage in heaven, she says, I can't help it. She says, I get a little bit depressed. She says, I want to go to heaven. She says, oh, most definitely. She said, but I get a little depressed whenever I hear that passage. And I said, why, Sister McDowell? She said, because you should have known my husband. She said, I could have been married to that man for 1,000 years or throughout all eternity. That's how much I loved him. She got it. She understood what marriage was all about, and evidently Brother McDowell did too. Building up greater marriages, building up the home. Let's make our homes great again. That's what we need to do. If we can get our homes straightened out, and we can do it through proper teaching and through proper, practical instruction, we could help change our nation that desperately needs some studies on marriage and family today. You may be here tonight, not a Christian. I want to tell you this. If you're here tonight and not a Christian, not a member of the Church of our Lord, the family of God, your home's hurting. It may be that your husband or a wife who's ready to obey the gospel, maybe a young person who's reached an age of accountability, and you say, I want our home to be complete, where every one of us in the family is a Christian, all helping each other, all serving one another, striving to go to heaven. I know that this church wants to help you become a Christian. And if you're here tonight and you say, what I need more than anything else is prayers from my spiritual family. It may be a prayer on behalf of your earthly family, maybe a prayer because of something personal that's going on in your life, but you want the prayers of your brethren. I know I can speak for these elders and for every member here. Before we're dismissed tonight, we would be more than happy to go to God in prayer on your behalf. Let's stand and sing.